Hello, I've had a couple of requests for audio versions of my blogs, so here we go with the first of them. This is Glastonbury Mysteries at Imbloc, an Imbloc pilgrimage retracing the steps of Brighids, and it incorporates a story of revealed magic. You'll see towards the end. On 1st of February 2019, I attended a midday ceremony at Chalice Well in Glastonbury to mark the festival of Imbloc. It's exactly 24 hours ago, when I wrote this, that I was sitting by the well with my partner Fleur, with snow falling gently all around, an Imbloc blanket. Perhaps 80 to 90 of us all together huddled around the wellhead with the beautiful Vesica Pisces symbol on the cover of the well. This symbol, amongst other things, represents the womb and was associated with the goddess Venus, goddess of love, in earlier times. A very apt symbol for Imbloc, with its associations of femininity and birthing, embodied in Brigid, the feminine deity particularly associated with this time, also known as Bridget, Bridie, Bride. Those are other names for her. So now, having personally celebrated Imbloc for over a quarter of a century, Brigid's come to hold a very special place in my heart. As a pagan goddess, she's honoured for embodying the triple aspects of poetry, healing and smithcraft. What's particularly striking to me is the contrast between the qualities of kindness, compassion and gentleness, contrasting with those of warrior woman, strength and power, a beautiful balance. And this is fully reflected for me in the flower that best represents and symbolises Imbloc, the snowdrop. In order to emerge through the frozen ground at this time, the snowdrop needs to forge deep roots and emerge through ice and snow like a focused arrowhead, with full force and purpose. Yet in its flowering is reflected the utter tenderness of existence. Try looking carefully and intently at the open flower of a snowdrop blossom for several minutes. I predict you'll be incredibly moved by the vision of sublime tenderness embodied and reflected before you. After the simple ceremony at Chalice Well, there was a generous invitation to join a guided pilgrimage to Bride's Mound, St Brigid's Chapel, to the west of Glastonbury, led by a member of the Friends of Bride's Mound, who I'd encourage you to consider supporting, as it's vital work they do, and I'm supporting them. As we left Chalice Well, an old friend of mine who lives in Glastonbury posed a question. He reflected on the historical evidence that the site of Brigid's Mound, as he understood it, had been a place dedicated to the goddess, tended by women and nuns, yet all the bodies excavated nearby had been male. I set off with that strange paradox in my mind, and with the humorous images of all those unworthy men arriving at the gates of Avalon, ending up on the wrong side of the gatekeeper's question: how do you best honour the feminine? Our guide led us, carrying a large flag standard bearing the symbol of the Glastonbury dragon upon it. As we walked, I chatted with her about the history and archaeology of the locality. She clearly knew much of the story of this place and had been intimately involved with the preservation and care of Bride's Mound since the mid-1980s. I reflected on a story I'd read many years ago, which spoke of Glastonbury egg stones. I remembered reference to one such stone in the Abbey grounds being referred to as of more weight and value in terms of wealth than that of all the assets of the Abbey in its heyday. My presumption is that this reference is in terms of spiritual wealth and weight. I'm familiar with that stone. I'm also familiar with the second stone, an egg stone, on the side of Glastonbury Tor. Both of these stones are of significance and value to my own spiritual path in that they somehow embody the essence and energy of the old ways, particularly in relation to the divine feminine. I went on to tell our guide about a third Glastonbury egg stone which I understood to be in the Beckery region of the town, but I didn't know where. She said that whilst she knew about the first 2 egg stones that I spoke of, she'd never heard reference to a 3rd stone. So I left it there. We continued following one of the pilgrim routes to the site, which culminates in a walk along a ridge beside the River Brew. Halfway along there's a stone dedicated to St Bride, which Wesley Tudor Pole, the rediscoverer of Chalice Well, commissioned to mark the spot where his sisters are reputed to have found a blue bowl associated with the goddess and the Grail, apparently buried by a man called Goodchild in the 19th century. This was to mark what he considered to be Bride's Well, following a dream he had had. It seems the stone has since been moved from its original more central spot in the field to its current place next to the river, because the farmer who worked the field found that the stone got in the way. As a group, we continued on our pilgrimage, 29 of us now, strung out in a line in respectful, reflective silence. We made our way toward the area known as Bride's Mound, where the chapel of St Brigid originally stood. With our dragon banner fluttering fiercely in the biting winter wind, and the snow crunching beneath our feet, it made for quite a grounding, primal experience. We'd been told how early pilgrims would have made their way across the Somerset levels from the Polden Hills in the distance, via ancient boarded trackways constructed over the waters, believed to date from as long ago as the Bronze Age. The track culminated at a fording or bridging place over the River Brew, which I've since learned was called Pons Perilous, probably because it would have been treacherous to cross it, as it was often underwater, as much of the Somerset levels would have been, especially in winter. I believe the modern day name is Pompal's Bridge, still retaining that essence of its older name. In legend, it's the spot from which Bedivere, one of King Arthur's knights, is reputed to have thrown the sword Excalibur into the waters of the River Brew after Arthur's death. It would make sense for Arthur to have returned to this resting place, carried in a low-lying barge or boat after his death, as the description given in the legends apparently fits with the geography and situation of Beckery. If one also considers Arthur's illuminating experience at Brigid's Chapel earlier in his life, which I describe a bit later on in this article, then it makes even more sense for his body to have come home to rest here. From the site of the old river crossing, it's only a couple of 100 yards to a slight rise in the land and a ridge at the site of the old chapel of Brigid. What feels astounding to me is to stand in a spot where the sacred entry to the Isle of Avalon was marked for hundreds and hundreds of years. Who knows how long ago, in time, those ancient pilgrim routes stretch back. Given my work with song and dream tracks, I suspect it could well be thousands of years. But no matter, the spell lingers for those inclined to pause. In common legend, it's said that Brigid herself travelled over from Ireland in 488 AD and spent around 10 years at this site, now dedicated in her name. Before her visit, it was apparently a chapel dedicated to Mary Magdalene. There's evidence to suggest 3 chapels on this site, each one overlaying the one before. The first of these was a wooden structure in Saxon times, around when Brigid is said to have visited. Then a small stone chapel, built a couple of 100 years later. And finally a larger stone church, built in Norman times, more akin to the churches we're familiar with in our landscape now. Apparently the larger chapel grew out of the need to accommodate some relics that Brigid had left behind, along with all the extra pilgrims drawn to visit as a direct result. These relics were apparently her pen and a pouch, which seemingly served as an inkwell. There's no sign of any of the structures now, However, excavations have revealed the triple chapel history and mystery of the site, along with the revelation of 70 skeletons in a cemetery next to the site. Now, I'd been posed this riddle as I left Chalice Well, so I asked our guide, how come all the buried bodies found at the site had been male, while the chapel and those who originally tended it were female? Her answer was as intriguing as the question. She suggested that in the time of the chapel, it had been tended by women. In the time that the chapel had been tended by women, no burials took place, and that the cemetery marked a later phase when male priests came to preside over the chapel. Who knows? How interesting to speculate. After first drafting this article, I've spoken with my learned friend, Professor Ronald Hutton, about this. Whilst it appears there's no evidence to suggest the site was ever tended by women, recent dating in 2018 of two of the male bodies has revealed that they were indeed concurrent with the time that Brigid is said to have visited, confirming that the site was active at that time. We conducted a short ritual in circle at Brigid's Mound with a small contained fire, where we offered our dedications to release, to new beginnings, and to the goddess Brigid at Imbloc. This was rounded off with a toast of primrose wine, which we all shared between ourselves and the earth. It felt beautiful to be marking this special time at this sacred place of Brigid, potent and important. What's fascinating to consider is that all the pilgrims arriving at this spot for the Isle of Avignon apparently spent 24 hours resting and reflecting in sanctuary before proceeding to Glastonbury tour. Brigid's shrine at Kildare on the Isle of Ayr still bears an eternal flame which burns all year round. Historically, 19 female guardians protected and tended the flame, 19 being the sacred number, the number of years in the metonic cycle when moon and sun complete an intimate dance together. The modern priestesses of this shrine from the Brigidine order, Solas Brigid in Ireland, visited Bride's Mound in Glastonbury to conduct a ceremony as part of the Goddess Conference in 2005. Apparently there was a traditional pilgrim route from Ireland which traversed the Bristol Channel to Bridgewater and thence up through Somerset to Glastonbury. Somerset literally meaning land of the summer people, since in winter it was mostly underwater. It's likely that monks travelled over from Ireland on pilgrimage up until the time of Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monasteries. One of the possible origins for the name Beckery may be Little Ireland, since the Gaelic is Bec Eru, due to its connections with Ireland. It may just as likely derive from the Old English Becere, meaning Beekeeper's Island, Beckery being one of the 7 historical islands of Glastonbury. Just as Henry VIII marked a major transition in the religious journey of these lands, so St Brigid's Chapel figures prominently at another juncture in the transition of our traditions. For it is related that it was at this very spot, St Brigid's Chapel, that King Arthur had a dream in which he adopted a new standard and symbology for his flag. From now on it would carry the image of the Virgin and Child, whereas up until this point his standard bore the symbol of the dragon. I see that as likely to be a reflection of changing times and the supplanting of the old ways by the new, pagan ways either falling to or being incorporated into, depending on your viewpoint, the emerging Christian tradition. Yet here we are now, at another possible juncture, where the old ways re-emerge and the dragon standard flies afresh. The significance of our intimate relationship with nature's dragon lines coming back into consciousness after a sleep of around 2,000 years. After our beautiful little ceremony and ritual at the site of the chapel, we wandered off in smaller groups heading back towards Glastonbury town, via a shorter route through Beckery which these days is a motley hodgepodge of scrapyards, coal stores, dilapidated warehouses and deserted workshops, alongside the town sewage works. It's become the neglected and less visited end of town, largely forgotten and unloved. As we headed off in our small group, we chatted with a young woman who hailed from Wisconsin. A parent and grandparent of hers were apparently descended from a tradition of Welsh witches, and she'd been named accordingly. As we walked through the decrepit and somewhat depressing industrial and post-industrial landscape, I related the tale of the Glastonbury egg stones, along with the fact that our guide hadn't heard of a third stone. At which point, the young woman quite calmly and matter-of-factly pointed to a neglected patch of land we were walking past, declaring, "Oh, it's over there between those 3 trees," which were inaccessible due to masses of bramble and wild growth. I stopped, unsure whether it was her joke, a cosmic joke, no joke at all, or all 3 of those weirdly combined. Surreal as it turned out, she had the answer. How come an individual from several thousand miles away could know something local experts of the vicinity had not the faintest clue about? She proceeded to relate to me how she'd come to Glastonbury some years before on a course with Janet Farrar of the Alexandrian tradition of old magic. Janet had taken her there to specifically show her where the 3rd egg was to be found. How strange it felt to be literally walking past the very spot when the information came to light. What odds on that for multiple synchronicities? Yet here we were. It was no joke. Rather, it felt like a touch of supreme magic, a scattering of fairy dust within an unpromising environment. I can only imagine Brighids smiling tenderly, gently tickled and amused at the picture of me stopped dead in my tracks, gobsmacked and inspired in equal measure. The goddess certainly moves in mysterious ways. What I've discovered since is that place names ending in "on", such as Avalon, are associated with significant and sacred stones. With gratitude I dedicate this writing to Fleur, without whose gentle encouragement and inspiration I'd neither have been part of this particular pilgrimage, nor penned this piece. There's a postscript, possibly a prescript. Years ago, possibly 15 or so, around the time I discovered the writing about the 3 egg stones, I had a dream. That in itself is significant, for I barely ever remember any dreams. In this dream, the 3 egg stones are being restored to their original and rightful place on the top of Glastonbury Tor. The sense of the dream was that they'd been rolled off or displaced from there at the time the old ways of Avalon were being dissolved. Maybe the stones don't literally need to be back on top of the Tor. Maybe it's simply a symbol of something already happened or happening. Yet in my own mind's eye, the 3 sacred egg stones, embodied in the name Avalon, necessarily need to be back atop the Tor, with the dragon energy protecting them. Otherwise, as a species, what chance have we of correcting our diversion into the dissolution of nature? Our very survival depends on a healthy alignment to spirit, the divine feminine alongside the divine masculine. The metonic cycle embodied in the tending of Brigid's flame, reflecting a healthy balance between moon and sun, between female and male energies. It's for each of us, as part of our life's purpose, to find this magic within. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed listening. Bye-bye.